Hello, and welcome to today's episode of the Ageless Wisdom Mystery School and our series, Wisdom of the Soul. I'd like to mention at the top of the class today that though we've touched on it in past classes and we'll revisit the whole idea in the future as well, that the concept of the wisdom of the soul is based on, I would say, a mystical concept that we don't find in most religions. Um, in monotheism, which is essentially the Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, which sort of unfolded, um, all based on Abraham in the ancient times in the Middle East. There's this whole idea of having a soul, that it may be invisible, we can't find where it is in the body, but it is thought of as being, in a way, like a spiritual organ, that you have a soul, it's indwelling, and it's at least in Christianity, you're born with original sin. This is particularly Catholic, but I think when the Protestants or so-called Protestants broke away, they carried that idea of original sin, Adam and Eve, and the apple and the snake, and all of that. Um, Many Eastern philosophies, theologies, religions suggest that there really is no soul, but it's such a fine point. I don't want to go into it right now. But in mysticism, which is found in Western, Middle Eastern, and Eastern philosophies and theologies, the soul is a concept that is a little more complex. The idea is the soul overshadows and extends, such that human beings don't have a soul. It's more like the soul has a human being. Maybe you've heard it said, we don't have souls, we are souls. Or we're not human beings with a spiritual nature, we're spiritual beings temporarily incarnated into a physical nature. So my point in mentioning this at the top of the class today is simply that if there is an overshadowing soul, above and free of form, we ought to be able to contact it. We ought to be able to listen to the voice of the soul and access the wisdom of the soul. And if you consider times that you know things that you don't know how you know them, times where you have a deja vu, perhaps, times that you have an aha experience of a sudden burst of awareness or insight, and these thoughts arrive full blown, this whole big picture, like a Tetris game, just suddenly all falls together, and you go, oh my God, wow, you know what I just realized? But it was not a function of logic. It wasn't something you figured out. A led to B, led to C, led to your ultimate conclusion. It just arrives full blown. Consider that could be a revelation of your own oversoul. And it really changes the way you look at things. So in case you ever wondered, what is the wisdom of the soul exactly? Because here we are last week touching on Buddhism. Again, today we're going to touch on Buddhism. Buddhists, that's one of those groups that denies there is such a thing as a soul. Uh, so, again, not to dwell on it, let's dedicate a whole program to it. It occurred to me today to mention that. And we'll touch on it again. There is, via intuition or your conscience, a higher self, and we can access that with meditation, which is why we open with meditation. I also want to remind you that this program is available in its entirety as a video on YouTube. The channel is the Ageless Wisdom Mystery School. We also podcast to all podcatchers and players and aggregators as Ageless Wisdom Mystery School. And my personal website is michaelbenner.com. There's a lot there. Poke around sometime. Check out what's behind the landing page and treat yourself to a little tour. With that, let's do an opening meditation. What do you say? Get comfortable in your chairs or your meditation pillows or sitting on your bed or wherever you happen to be. And close your eyes and give yourself a moment to just settle in, to turn within, so to speak. And with your eyes closed, take a few slow, deep breaths. Inhaling strength and power. Pause for just a moment as you peak. And as you exhale, that's the letting go side. Breathe all the way out beyond where you'd normally stop, all the way. Pause. What's the hurry? And then inhale again, slowly through the nose, ideally through the nose, till you peak. And pause before exhaling just as slowly through the nose or through pursed lips if you exhale through the mouth. Create a little back pressure. And do that a couple of more times. You're telling your body, your brain, that you're safe and can relax. You're telling the limbic brain, the emotional center, in the fight or flight area, the amygdala, that you're actually very safe now. So safe, you close your eyes, take some slow breathing, slow everything down, slow, deep breathing, and feel the letting go. Create and sense that letting go feeling. As if you're softening or yielding to deep relaxation. Softening like butter on a warm day. Or the deep relaxation necessary to float on your back in fresh water. That's a relaxation skill for sure. Imagine floating on your back in water and how much trust is involved. You could even say faith that the water will support you. When Christ walked on water, he was at that very time talking about fearlessness, to be unafraid. Because fear creates tension in the body, doesn't it? Fear is a holding on feeling. Fearlessness is letting go. Love is letting go. higher consciousness and expanded awareness comes from letting go, not only of muscular tension, but the anxiety and the confusion behind it, the uncertainty. Let go of uncertainty as you feel your body relaxing. And trust the integrity of the universe. We tend to live our lives in bits and pieces, but the universe is one thing. Like a unicycle has one wheel and a bicycle has two. The universe is one thing spinning around. That's what that word means. It's whole. In place of thinking of yourself as an individual seeking to understand this wholeness, identify as the wholeness, emanating or radiating, extending itself out into those fragments, the elements, the bits and pieces of the material world. Identify as the whole. It means letting go of the idea of self, of I, me, mine. And surprisingly, as you learn to do that, even if only in your imagination, you find that you remain. You don't need a separative sense of individuality, you see. Your name, just a name. Your career, what you do for a living, your job, is merely that. We need not define ourselves by our name or what we do for a living. Consider that we're really not limited to what we think of ourselves. Clearly, we're more than what others think of us. But we're even more than what we think of ourselves, aren't we? We're what we care about. Doesn't that ring true for you? What you care about is much more important than all this scattered, frenzied thinking like a grasshopper jumping around all over the place. You feel how much more solid the ground on which you stand when you go to, what do I care about? What do I love? What do I feel is important to me? peace of mind, love, joy, or happiness for no reason. Can you consider happiness for no reason? Do you remember being happy for no reason? Children are not always happy, but when they are, it's often for no reason. There's no thinking, no analysis, no logic behind it. They allow themselves to be happy for no reason. That's joy. And nobody taught us to feel that or be that, to be that joy, that happy. Something pretty fundamental about it. And when we're not happy, when we experience mere discontent, some sort of suffering, a problem or set of problems, a concern, a little or a lot, to rediscover that joy, that happiness for no reason, is not a matter of attaining or achieving anything. It's a function of letting go of everything that is not joyous. Can you imagine doing that? Feeling safe enough to let go of all of your concerns and trust that you'll be supported. Can we consider that the entirety of the universe conspires to support us? That our discontent and our problems and our suffering and our torment is pretty much self-imposed. And there may be a voice in our head that says, no, others are doing it to me. But are we taking the bait? Are we buying into it? Are we agreeing? Are we trying to find meaning and purpose in being some sort of martyr? Outdoing each other with conversation, with small talk about who suffers more? And although we want love, we settle for sympathy? How much of our small talk, our chit-chat, our daily conversation with others is, oh, I'm sorry to hear that, but I've got a story for you. I suffer even more than you do. I don't want to overstate this because when we care about other people, we do want to listen to them and be concerned about them, their well-being. And sympathy is certainly not a bad thing. It's a matter of to what degree, you see. It's when we hold on to, when we create attachments to our suffering, when we play victim as if there were something to gain. So we'll always have problems in an impermanent world. Change is guaranteed. Stuff happens, right? But there's that extra dimension when you relax, when you breathe, when you let go, when you do your daily meditation early in the day before it comes upon you. And you deliberately become non-attached, even to the idea that you're a separated self or a victim of anything, and identify as the witness. It's like watching TV or watching a movie. You find yourself getting involved if it's really good, if it's entertaining, if it's effective. Your body will react to video and audio as if it's real. Just as your body reacts and responds to imagination, to ideas in your mind's eye that you entertain. Brain does not know the difference. Such that a great deal of what we believe to be reality is merely phantasms of the mind, shadows on the wall devoid of substance, oversized, exaggerated, and distorted, unless and until we let go, stand back, and remember you are the observer. You be the watcher, the witness of this individual you know as self, going through this experience. And identify as the mindful observer, curious, fascinated, and intrigued, and yet not judging, understanding without judgment, without overlaying right or wrong or good or bad or better or worse or winner or loser or any of that silly dual everything or nothing, bifurcated false dichotomy nonsense. Enjoy that elevated perspective. every morning before you begin your day. Love life. Trust it. Don't judge it. Maybe a difficult problem is really a gift. Maybe every storm cloud really does have a silver lining. Maybe every curse is really a blessing in disguise. What if all things work together for good? What if? I'm not telling you how it is. I'm suggesting that we consider that possibility. As long as we're awake, aware, alert, that is to say, as long as we have love in our hearts, as long as we're aware of what we care about, truly care about, then all things work together for good. What if that's true? It merits your consideration. I'd like you to consider today as a blessing. Today is full of grace, full of joy. Today could be one of the best days of your life. At some point during the day today, something wonderful may be waiting to occur, to blossom. Just gently, as if fragile, in the palm of your hand. Hold this idea for just a moment that today just might be one of the best days of your life. See if there isn't just a little smile on your face, just the corner of your mouth upturned ever so gently, as some part of you knows, some part of you really does know that this can be a wonderful day. Based entirely on what you do with it, regardless of what appears to be happening to us. Don't confuse the appearance of things for reality. The appearance of things is not always good, true, or beautiful. But substantially in the background, the common ground that supports and vivifies all that is. There is goodness and truth and beauty. You can count on it. Bring this expectation gently with you into the wide awake state as we form the intention to conclude our meditation and return to the wide awake state. 2, feel a gentle rising up, a floating up, like waking in the morning. And 3, eyes open. Open your eyes now, wide awake. Back in the room. Take a big breath. Remind yourself you're the breather. You're the witness, but you can also be the breather. Take a big breath. Feeling better than before. Eyes open, wide awake, feeling better than before. Good. All righty. I enjoyed that. I make that stuff up as I go along. It really wasn't planned. I like that. I'm going to revisit that. All right. Today, we're going to follow up on last week's class on the 10 fetters. And these are hindrances. They're not like the commandments of Moses, don't do this, don't do that. If you were here or listened to the replay as a podcast or YouTube video, you know that these are just a list of common bad habits, typical things, mindsets, I guess, attitudes or beliefs that hinder our growth, that make it more difficult for us to move forward. And so by recognizing these hindrances, these fetters, we can do a better job of managing our tendency to behave in this way or to hold these belief systems. And then get on the pony and ride. You know, we can begin to accelerate our growth. The last of the 10 was a reference to ignorance and the relationship of fear to ignorance, which is really a vicious cycle. That's what fear is. Fear has nothing to do with danger. Every dictionary I've ever looked in, looking up the word fear, makes some reference to danger or a threat or a hazard of some sort, real or imagined. Nevertheless, that's the common definition of fear. It's not true. Fear is a response to confusion, to ignorance, to uncertainty. And the proof of that lies in the fact that the more you understand whatever it is you're afraid of, the less fear you have, even though the danger may remain constant. This is why we do fire drills and earthquake drills. And the Boy Scout motto, be prepared, because the more you know about a hazard or a danger, the less fear you suffer. And you may mitigate the consequences of the danger. You likely are going to be more likely to survive or minimize your injuries or whatever negative consequences occur from the danger, but the danger itself is unaffected. So fear is not really, warning, Will Robinson. Warning is, it's an alert, not to the danger itself, but to the fact that there's something here you don't know in 2 areas. Ignorance in the situation, so-called situational awareness. Sometimes this includes a reference to operational awareness, but that's the world around you. And then even more importantly and more basic is ignorance of the lack of self-awareness. Who am I really? What is my role in all of this? Why do I think, feel, and act the way I do? Why do I behave without considering the consequences of my speech and behavior. I just do it and then suffer as a result of being largely unconscious and reactive and reflexive. And then I obsess on the kickback I get from that, like whatever karma I generate as a result of that. You made me angry. You made me feel this way or that. So the whole secret is to become more aware. That's what fearlessness is, to be more aware. And then we are consequently less ignorant, which is a good thing. Well, as we suggested last week, but didn't have time to get to, in Buddhism, there is a reference to 5 types of ignorance. And so, because we didn't have time to get to it last week, I thought we would do it this week. 5 different ways that we can be ignorant. And then we'll also talk about, time permitting, I'm sure we'll have time to get to the so-called precepts, which are real fundamental, real basic. Well, these are the precepts. When we get to the precepts, that's pretty much like the commandments. It's really refrain from this, refrain from that. If a Buddhist is going to be serious about, quote, becoming a Buddhist, they accept these 5 precepts. So they're real basic and real fundamental. But first, I want to talk about the 5 kinds of ignorance. So Melinda has the outline that I wrote up, and Mindy, if you'll come on mic and begin to read these for me, I'll comment on them one at a time.
These are Buddhism's wrong views. The 5 wrong views or ignorances are: number 1, belief that you are your physical body.
That's number 1, and that's the big one. The belief that you are your physical body. And it's not just the belief that you are the physical body, period, stop, right? But that you are a separated sense of awareness or consciousness living in this body. Okay, I can buy that the body is transitory, temporary, impermanent, that in most cases, every cell in your body gets replicated, gets replaced. You get a new body. I think there are some nerve cells that don't get replaced. Melinda, this is your purview. Do you know, in fact, are there some cells that are never replaced, or is every cell in your body at some point replaced?
The hook on that, I actually looked that up when we were talking about it before, is that cells replace themselves, but you don't start out de novo. Like, for instance, your skin, if you've got flawed, wrinkled skin with problems, you don't grow baby skin. You grow your skin again. So there's a caveat. Yes, cells have a turnover, cells die and are replicated, but they're replicated in their own form, more or less.
So an aging body will replicate.
Body. Yeah, it doesn't mean that you won't be able to improve your overall health, but the idea that we get these brand new, shiny new cells, yeah, that's right.
Okay,
but we are who we are.
Well, that's an important point. We still are not this, there's no permanence to this body. Even in a single lifetime with a single body, it's regenerating itself and replacing itself. Are there certain nerve cells that never replace themselves, neurons?
I'll look that up real quickly because I want to be 100% sure. But I know, for instance, if you cut a peripheral nerve, it will regenerate. I think it's a centimeter a month. but sometimes the connections are flawed. And certainly there are some disease entities that cause abnormal, like cirrhosis of the liver, perfect example. You get all this proliferation of cells, but they're nonsensical, they don't function. So, you know, it's more complicated than that, but clearly most things are turning over. And I'll let me be a little clearer on that. Look that up too.
All right, good. Thank you for that. So this first wrong view, you're not your body, goes beyond not being your body. You are not yourself. You are not the separated self. Now, it's difficult when you study the literature to deal with this whole word. In Buddhism, for example, there is a reference to the no self or the non-self. That who we really are is a no self or a non-self. We are the all that is. We are an emanation, a manifestation of one thing. And if it were anything but Buddhism, we could use the word God. But Buddhism is not a religion. Some practice it as if it were, but it's not. And there's no reference to God whatsoever in any way, in any form in Buddhism. And yet there are many areas of Eastern and Western and Middle Eastern mysticism and Hinduism where the self is a reference to the qualities of being in form, small s self, the separated human individual, fleshy being, and its identity of selfness, and a capital S self, which would be akin to the soul. And so when you read Eastern philosophy, you come up against this contradiction. Well, what self are they talking about? And it merits study with, I just want to give you the understanding that at first blush, it's going to be full of contradiction because you have to really embrace or maybe wrestle with this idea of what do they mean by self? Ramana Maharshi, for example, the great mystic Ramana Maharshi talks endlessly about self, but he means a higher self, an overshadowing soul, as I discussed at the beginning of today's class. Again, the Buddhist says all sense of self, either as individuated soul or as a fleshy body, a meat body, is an illusion. That ultimately we're all one. So, again, you may see it as a contradiction. Somebody's got to get their story straight here. But I would suggest you approach it, embrace it, the contradiction, and do your best to understand this as variations on a theme. That everything is true to some extent and everything is false to some extent, and your job is to weave your own tapestry of understanding around the relative nature of these words. Words are just symbols, right? You're not going to arrive at a clear-cut definition of these abstract concepts, but the effort is worth it. It's wonderful it's necessary, it's really essential to expanding your view, to expanding your awareness or raising your consciousness. If you're going to get this elevated view, we have to address this idea. But I guess the thread that runs through spiritual traditions of all kinds and all sorts is that we're not what we appear to be. We are material beings that are animated by an energy or a spirit and illumined by an energy or a spirit. That consciousness, awakeness, awareness, the fact that you are living, breathing, is not an epiphenomena of brain chemistry, as the Western scientists would have you believe, though they are slowly coming around, largely through the study of quantum physics. It's not that they're all getting religion, these scientists. It's through, it's through quantum physics and entanglement and the observer effect and the double slit experiment that they're beginning to recognize that the one thing you cannot get behind in cause, effect, this effect is caused by, and that cause is an effect of a previous cause, which is an effect of some other cause, and you daisy chain your way back through these dominoes, and you get to awareness, and you can't get behind that. That's the one thing you can't get behind. That's the absolute. That's the ultimate. That's the Godhead. Awareness. That's who we are. That's what we are. So, awareness of what? Well, it begins with awareness that we're not separate from anything. We're not the self we appear to be. In body, in mind, in emotions. I think that ought to be obvious if you just begin to think about the environment or the ecosystem. The way you have all of these thousands and thousands and thousands of individual species of plants and animals, and human beings are really the animal kingdom, that are all unique individuals, but phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. I remember that from school. That whole breakdown of all this apparent separation and uniqueness, the diversity of life forms on this planet, all work in harmony together, such that there is no separation. We talked a few weeks ago about how with the industrialization of the last couple hundred years, the rain now contains antibiotics and antidepressants and other popular common drugs that human beings consume. Sometimes we give to our animals that get urinated and defecated out into the environment and get into the whole life support system, into the waters, the lakes, the ocean, evaporated up into the clouds and rain down, and now we're part of that cycle. There is no separation. There's just one thing here. And the way COVID ripped through, we knew it would. Some of us have avoided getting it, but it's here. It's here to stay. Along with a million other viruses, a million may be overstated, many other, many other viruses and forms of bacteria and microbial life forms, incredibly diverse panoply of living organisms, yet there is an inner reliance and an interdependence, an overriding harmony that we can't dispute, such that diversity leads to harmony, leads to unity, don't you see? It's another aspect of the Trinity. It's that triangle where we have this multiplicity, all this diversity moving upward toward, oh, I see the harmony in how all of this works, moving up toward the top of the pendulum, so to speak, the top of the pyramid, one thing fixed. Just like all the colors of the rainbow are expressions of white light, one light. All right. Number 2, Mindy.
About number 1, some cell lines only reproduce when they are damaged: nerve cells, heart cells, muscle cells. So it's a very complicated and fascinating subject if anyone wants to go into it. Number 2, belief in duality: object subject split, extremes of separation with no middle way, which is non-duality.
Yeah, there's a lot there. Let's start with the subject-object split. You see how this flows out of the first wrong view, the first ignorance. I am this separate body. Well, if I am this, then everything that is not this must be that. Right? If I'm going to separate me, then I've separated everything else. Not only from me, but reinforced by the appearance of things from each other, such that we have this common understanding in physics that two objects that have mass, if they're solid anyway, this is not true for gases or liquids, but if they're solids, two or more objects cannot occupy the same space at the same time. And so most of us live our lives as if we're a billiard ball on a pool table, banging around, crashing into each other. You know, road rage, get out of my way. And you say, well, you know, that's a reality. Two cars can't occupy the same space. So you got to be respectful and careful and obey the rules of the road. And yeah, but beyond that reality of physical dense, a material world, and again, that would be true for ice, but if the ice melts and becomes water, the rules change. Now liquids can be blended, and if the liquid evaporates and becomes a gas, even more so. It still has mass, right? But they can blend together. So it's a pretty relative concept, how solid. What is the state? Water is a great example. Ice, liquid, gas. But this whole idea of this is not that and that is not this, and even the number 1 can be this one, the whole one, all one, the only one, the unified one, or a separative one. Well, I got this one, but I didn't get that one. And we're so used to this idea of this one and that one, it permeates even our language. Most sentences are made of a subject and an object separated by a verb. Bill ran to the store. Well, that's not a good example. To the store is a prepositional phrase. Sally held the vase. Held is the verb. Sally is the subject, the vase is the object, right? We have objective views and subjective views. This is a split that has to be challenged as and identified as a wrong view ultimately if we're going to understand the wholeness That's what holy means, by the way. Holy is holistic, is usually spelled without the W, but it's the same as if it were all that is one. So even our language is set up to have these separate bits acting on other separate bits. And we don't really see the flow or the unity of things. I heard someone explain how other cultures have language, and I think this is true of Esperanto, which is sort of an invented language. Let's take a sentence like Bill skied down the mountain. You have Bill dressed up for winter, wearing skis, and moving down a mountain. So Bill is on the mountain. Bill is not the mountain. The mountain is not Bill. The act of skiing is the verb, the action. But it doesn't really tell us about how it feels to ski down a mountain, or the freshness of the cold wind in your face, or the snow, or the ice, or the sound. All of that is missing. And we don't have a way with our languages of putting that together in a harmonious way so that we can express the whiteness, the freshness, the whooshness of skiing down the mountain. You see, it's just this person on skis going down a mountain. This is the challenge to a creative writer. One of the reasons we love film and video. And it's because our language, again, breaks things up into bits and pieces. But that's just the beginning of the subject-object split. Just the idea that I am not you, you are not me, we disagree, and so the emphasis is immediately on the conflict or the contradiction rather than some element of harmony. Oh, we disagree? Oh, far out. Tell me all about how you see this, because my view is obviously narrow and selective, and oh, I would be fascinated in learning about your variation on that theme. What do you see about this that's different? And instead, we're like, what do you mean? Well, you're wrong because I know I'm right. And all this immediate conflict comes out of it. There's a lot more, but in Buddhism, there's a concept called the middle way that takes us from duality, the duality of this or that, of either or, of all or nothing, to non-duality. And that's a term I'd like you to consider for further study. Google that. Watch some videos, read some articles on non-duality, because it tends to integrate this kind of philosophy with some really hard science about the wholeness of systems and the harmony of systems that leads to an ultimate sense of unity. And man, that can have an enormous benefit when it comes to expanding your intelligence and your awareness. It's a little bit afternoon. Let's zoom through these so that we have time for Q&A. What's number 3, Mindy?
Attachment to absolute views.
This is, again, do you see how this flows? See how these 5 ignorances are also one thing, just different points of views? Absolutism is a pox on humanity. It's a total curse. This has to be absolutely right, absolutely wrong, There's no middle ground. I'm not going to concede your point. You're absolutely wrong. It's reactionary. It's reflexive. It is the mindset of a person with a high level of stress and anxiety. It is fear-based. There are such things as absolutes. There can be absolute truth. We discussed this at length in previous classes. And we won't avoid it. We'll talk about it some more. But there is also, in the two truths doctrine, beyond the existence of some absolutes, a huge body of relative truth or subjective truth that we need to acknowledge. How big is big? How fast is fast? Why is your big toe so much smaller than a small car? You see, it's just all relative. Okay, number 4, Mindy.
Perverted views, rejection of karma, impermanence, reincarnation.
These 3 principles, karma, reincarnation, and impermanence, are in many ways a cornerstone, like the Four Noble Truths, a cornerstone of Buddhism. So if you fail to understand or accept or even consider the working, again, these are not 3 separate things. These are part of one process: karma, reincarnation, impermanence. Those are 3 ways of describing one thing, and they merit your study. The impermanence should be self-evident. Nothing lasts. Everything dies, rusts, corrodes, rots. Nothing lasts. Everything about the physical world is impermanent. The karma and the reincarnation flow, they follow on that, and are subjects that we can cover in the future. It's interesting how the concept of karma has permeated the West. It's people talk about it all the time. Well, that's bad karma. But it's sort of increasingly recognized as the same thing that Christ said about reaping what you sow. That's what karma is. There are consequences for not only what we do, but for what we think. For the thoughts are seeds, and the feelings behind them is karma for all of that. Your intention. Karma begins with intention. And then reincarnation, or what's often called transmigration. Yeah, we'll talk more about that in the future. But those 3 concepts are real fundamental to Buddhism. And are we up to number 5? Mindy?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I'm fighting my mute button. Attachment to superstition, orthodoxy, traditions, customs, and rituals.
And this was one of the fetters we talked about last week, attachment particularly to customs and ritual and ceremony. And the point here, again, is if you were aware of what you were doing, it wouldn't be so bad. But then it begs the question, what makes it a ceremony? Why is it a ritual? How much of this is superstition that you don't really understand and you don't know why you're doing it? It's authoritarian in nature, or it certainly tends to be. And the larger point, maybe the biggest point here, is it tends to become rote, which is devoid of conscious awareness. You just do it because you're told to do it. And that's how people pray. There was a Catholic nun, a mystic, Saint Teresa of Avila, in the Renaissance era, who was all but excommunicated from the church, the Inquisition, took serious issue with her suggestion that when we pray, we do it silently and pay attention to the meaning of the words. The church, the church in Rome thought that was putting too much responsibility on the individual. The church wanted you to pray by rote and just not even think about what you were doing, just say it over and over and over again, turn you into a robot or a machine of some sort. Well, what's the point if you're not aware of the meaning? And if you think of yourself as a Christian, for example, the Lord's Prayer, go over it line by line and ask yourself, I've said this all my life. Do I have any idea what it means? Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Okay, well, that's pretty basic. That's God in heaven. Your name is hallowed. It's revered. You're awesome. You're beyond understanding. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. What does that mean? Well, it means Jesus is coming back. Really? Are you sure? Isn't it a little deeper than that? And I could go on. Look at these prayers. Take them apart. Ask yourself, any ritual, any ceremony, you're going to participate, do it with expanded awareness, with consciousness. Be mindful about it, just like when you eat. I know we love to be social when we eat and talk and chit chat, but if you ever have an opportunity to eat alone, do it mindfully. Watch yourself eating the food. Experience fully the flavor, the texture of the food. Consider where it came from, what it took to get it to your plate, the nutrition behind it, the sunlight, the minerals in the soil. It's so full of the whole universe that to just gulp it down seems like a horrible waste. And so too with mindful walking, and more on mindfulness in the future. And since we're short on time, and I do want to get to the questions, direct your questions to Melinda and in the chat box, and your comments. And they don't even have to be limited to today's class. Anything you want to mention or talk about. Just put a short little version of it, condensed version of it in the chat box. Direct it to Melinda, and we'll get to that in just a second. But I don't really need to comment on the precepts. And Melinda, if you would just read those straight through. Again, these are the basic precepts of Buddhism, what not to do. Each of these begins with refrain from, basically don't do that, don't do this, don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal. Just read them through if you would, Melinda.
Number 1 is refrain from taking life, not killing any sentient being. Number 2, refrain from taking what is not given or stealing. Number 3, refrain from excessive sensual or sensory pleasure. Number 4, refrain from wrong speech, cheating, lies, slander, partial truth, and lies of omission. Number 5, refrain from intoxicants that cloud the mind.
There you go. The two that are tough for me in my life has been the eating of meat, which I still can't put down. I'm much better than I used to be at minimizing the amount of meat that I eat. But, well, anything I say further is going to sound like excuses. And I don't want to make excuses. I include meat in my diet. So I would not be a good Buddhist in that sense. And the intoxicants, a glass of wine or a beer once in a while, I'm frankly okay with that. And I've smoked a lot of weed in my life and done psychedelics, and I'd be a hypocrite to say that in that area I'd be a good Buddhist. I don't lie. I don't cheat. I don't steal. And the thing about the sensory and sensual pleasure we talked about last week, it doesn't mean you can't enjoy pleasure, the pleasure of touch, um, holding hands, massage, making love, the pleasure of listening to music, of eating good food, the pleasure of sleeping in a soft bed. You can do all of that, just don't see it as an end unto itself. You're not going to get liberated from samsara, from the endless cycle of birth and death, by pursuing pleasure. That is a wrong view. Buddha tried that. It didn't work. He tried abstinence and not eating and sleeping on a bed of nails. And even today, there are 5 more precepts for nuns and monks. And one of them is not sleeping in a high bed. And by that, they mean a comfortable bed. You have to sleep on the floor on a mat. Um, Otherwise, you're tempted to pursue comfort as if that's what will get you to heaven. You see, it's replicating paradise on earth. So enjoy yourself, enjoy pleasure. Just don't pursue it to an excess as if that's going to make you happy. It will not. It's pleasure is pleasure, but it doesn't lead to the ultimate joy and fulfillment and peace and bliss and ecstasy of the nirvana that we would like to have by continuing to expand our awareness and free ourselves from suffering. So that's as much as I'll say about the precepts. Okay, so let's go to the Q&A and see if we can generate a little conversation in the 15 minutes that are remaining.
Sounds good. Larry's up with a comment.
All right.
I'm going to read it, and you might want to chime in. One of the greatest things I've learned is that every problem is an opportunity.
That I would have to agree with, and I think that there's really profound wisdom in living that way. It's hard because so many problems we would like to avoid, so many problems are painful and cause suffering. So many problems seem unfair. But while that may be the case, there still are lessons to learn that maybe we couldn't learn any other way. Sometimes I think life will touch you with a feather to get your attention and attempt to teach you a lesson, but we miss that light touch. So it gives us a little push, but we ignore that. We don't recognize it. And then life gets a sharp stick and pokes you, but you're busy and you still didn't get the message. And so life hits you over the head with a brick and you go, why me? You know? Well, because we weren't aware, we weren't paying attention, we weren't looking to grow, we weren't embracing the opportunity. So life will find a way. That's part of karma. You want to expand on that, Larry?
Well, it's you said most of it. I would just add that it's also a great business opportunity. I mean, most of my career was built on that concept. A lot of the contracts I received was because somebody had a problem they couldn't figure out, so they hired me to come in and fix it. So because I look at it differently, and so a lot of work I had was because somebody had a problem that they couldn't figure out how to fix. So I think it changed most aspects of my life, the way I view a lot of things in personality and life. But also the important thing I wanted to stress is that it was great for my career.
I like the phrase you used, look at it differently. It reminds me of what makes comedians funny. Humor is found in truth. It's one reason there's no right-wing comedy, or what passes for right-wing Trumpian comedy is not very funny. It's usually just mean. The reason there's no right-wing comedy is that what's funny is the exposure of truth. And what makes a comedian funny, a particular man or a woman, is their ability to see things differently. They look at the same things we do, but they have that creative insight that you're referring to. And again, that's part of expanding your awareness. That's higher consciousness, and it reveals the humor in things. Humor is such a gift that we appreciate humor. I have compassion for the animals in that regard. I don't think animals know humor. And there are some people who are humorless. You just can't get a chuckle out of them no matter what. And they must suffer. They must suffer so. So it's a little off base to go to humor with that, but it is a kind of creativity. Thank you for that, Larry. Who else, Mindy?
No more questions or comments right now. Maybe someone would like to chime in. I was thinking with what Larry said, and neurologically, as we've talked about, we're programmed to notice things that might harm us, interfere with our survival. They have just a deep way of processing. And so to look at it the way Larry was talking about is so important. Sometimes I remind myself that I didn't necessarily learn a lot on my best day, enjoyed it, but that what really made an impact to learn from are things that didn't quite go that way. But that's our brains at work trying to say to us, okay, now here's something that's going to get you if you don't watch out.
Yeah. There are exercises that I do with my private clients from time to time where we will have them visualize a problem. Whatever is their frame of reference, however they visualize it is up to them. I never proscribe or prescribe a particular image for them. I just, honor the power of the imagination. Just tell me how that looks visually. How would you visualize that? And with eyes closed, using the mind's eye, begin to walk around that problem now. Walk around it. Look at it from all the different views. Now, look down on it from above. Get underneath it. Look up. Crawl inside that problem, right? Reach out and touch it. Listen to it. Smell it. Attempt to awaken all of the imaginary senses and sensations. And it stimulates the imagination and our creativity in a way that sometimes people will get a little mini sometimes you get a huge revelation, like, oh my God, that's it. Holy cow, that's it. That's the answer. Or, hey, this is a great approach. I got to pursue this. I'm going to open my eyes, grab some paper, or get on my computer, and wow, here's a whole opportunity I hadn't even considered, a whole approach to this problem that if we look at it differently. But beginning with the just mental exploration in your mind's eye is a great way to play with the imagination in a very creative way. I think a lot of people fail to do that. They'll sit there with their eyes open. And in normal consciousness, with all the monkey mind and all the stresses of those inner voices petitioning us for our attention, listen to me, what about this, what about that? That's not the best place to be creative or to promote insight and understanding. Close your eyes, breathe, relax, go to a meditative state, visualize, awaken all of your For every physical sense and sensation, there is an imaginary corollary. So awaken everything. Smell your problem, taste your problem, touch your problem, walk all around it, put it on. Wear their brain. Yeah, I know musicians. This was a technique I was taught 40 years ago. Put on, how did he used to say that? Put on the head and brains of a person that you admire. Like if you're trying to solve a math problem, imagine Einstein and you reach out and you lift his head in your mind's eye. I know this sounds insane, but try it. In your mind's eye, in relaxed states of deep meditation, imagine taking Einstein's head, skull, and brain off his body and putting it on yours. And then you relax and open up and think like Einstein. Now, if you just got a good idea or a great idea, even, you could dismiss that as just a coincidence. But if it works, it works. I've had people sit down at the piano who were just beginners, played very little piano. They were good enough to use two hands on the keyboard. And imagine putting on the head and brains of some great composer, Beethoven, Chopin, Bach. And now, without thinking about it, just allow your hands to play the piano. And we were both amazed at what came out. So, to be playful in these deep meditative states is, whether you think of it as solving a problem or just opening yourself to the natural font of creativity. Look at what we've invented in 200 years. My grandfather, my mother's father, was born in 1880 on a lumber camp. And he saw the invention of the automobile, the electric light, the airplane, the phonograph, the movie projector, and he sat with me on the sofa as we watched Neil Armstrong walk on the moon. And he lived a few years after that, as a matter of fact. So he was in he lived to 91. I guess he was in his late 80s when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. And I thought he would be like blown away. And he was. He thought it was far out. But he said to me, Michael, he said, I remember the first car. And learning that the Wright brothers had flown this airplane at Kitty Hawk. I remember reading about that in the paper. So he had seen so much in his life. And then the magic lantern, or what became the movie projector, and Edison's wax cylinders that became wire recorders and vinyl discs and CDs and streaming audio now. It's just...
I think Larry might have an addendum to that.
Go ahead, Larry.
I just wanted to add an example. I was a software engineer in my career, and we had a project from the owner of the company that we had to modify 22 systems all at once and have to implement them at the same time. That was a massive task. So we had 6 developers that were going to work long days for 3 days to try and do it. And using conventional thinking, that's what it would take to modify all of that. Well, I made one little suggestion to break it apart into pieces, and that changed it from a difficult task into a simple task that we could do over a period of time. And naturally, I got the job to do it because everybody wanted off of it. But the idea is to changing your thinking, not thinking the way you usually do, but is there another way to do this so it's not so hard? So that was, you know, a pivotal point. I mean, that was a really great moment for me, but the point is changing your thinking and trying to think of another way. If something's really hard, maybe there's another way to do it.
Yeah.
So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. Good. Go with the flow. What if it were easy? What a great question. Just ask yourself, what if this incredibly difficult problem I have, what if it were really easy and you make a game out of it, finding the easy way, because that's, I don't mean the shortcut, the cheap, half-assed way, but the elegant way, the beautiful way, the way the universe wants it to happen. Go with the flow, like water finding its way downhill. I love that. Thank you, Larry. Okay, let's unless you got somebody else, Binda, let's button it up.
There is nobody else. I hope that I can take your advice and finish my taxes.
Okay, well,
Fun.
Just imagine how wonderful you'll feel when it's all done.
Amen to that.
That's another tool for you. Well, thank you, everybody. I'd like you to all unmute and acknowledge each other before we go. Join us next week. We're here free every Sunday. And let me give you my thanks. Namaste, Aloha, and Salam. Thank you for being here.
See you next
Thank
week.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.